Imagine standing on the deck of a small boat in the middle of the Indian Ocean. Around you, the sea is calm. Ahead, a dense wall of forest rises from the shoreline, hiding everything beyond it. There are no buildings, no harbors, no signs of civilization. Only an island that seems determined to keep its secrets. As the boat drifts closer, someone suddenly points toward the beach. For just a moment, you catch a glimpse of movement between the trees. Then another. A few figures emerge from the forest, bows already raised. They don't wave. They don't call out. They simply watch, waiting for one thing: for you to leave. Within seconds, it's clear that this isn't fear. It's a warning. For thousands of years, the people who live here have defended this shoreline in exactly the same way. While kingdoms rose and collapsed, while ships crossed the oceans, while the modern world transformed almost every corner of the planet, this tiny island remained beyond its reach. Today, that makes them one of the last communities on Earth living almost entirely untouched by modern civilization. But their story isn't simply about isolation. It's about survival. Every tree, every stretch of beach, and every reef surrounding this island has become part of a way of life refined over countless generations. Here, the forest is more than a home. It provides food, shelter, medicine, and protection. The sea is more than water. It is both a source of life and the island's first line of defense against the outside world. To most of us, this place appears mysterious because we know so little about it. But for the people who call it home, there is no mystery at all. This is simply the world they have always known. Today, we're traveling to North Sentinel Island, not to uncover hidden secrets, but to understand how a small community has managed to survive here for thousands of years by choosing the one thing the rest of the world rarely has: to be left alone. The moment you stop thinking of North Sentinel Island as a place hidden from the world, something begins to make sense. Perhaps the island was never hiding. It was simply protecting the people who belonged to it. Long before maps gave this island a name, long before passing ships marked its location, generations of Sentinelese had already learned how to live with everything the island offered, and everything it demanded. Survival here was never guaranteed. It had to be earned every single day. The forests provided fruit, roots, honey, and wild game, but only to those who understood the rhythms of the seasons. The surrounding reefs trapped fish as the tide retreated, while the nearby waters offered turtles and other marine life. Every meal depended on knowledge carefully passed from one generation to the next. Nothing was wasted. Wood became shelters, tools, and bows. Vines became bindings. Leaves became roofs, strong enough to withstand tropical rains. Even without metal workshops or modern machines, the island held nearly everything they needed, if they knew where to look. And that knowledge became their greatest resource. Over thousands of years, the Sentinelese didn't survive because they possessed more than others. They survived because they learned to depend completely on what surrounded them. Every skill, every habit, and every tradition was shaped by an environment that rewarded patience and punished mistakes. That relationship also changed the way they saw strangers. For people whose survival depended entirely on the island, anything arriving from beyond the horizon brought uncertainty. A single outsider could introduce conflict, disease, or disruption to a way of life that had endured for countless generations. From their perspective, protecting the island also meant protecting the future of their community. So, when outsiders approached these shores, the bows were never simply weapons. They were a declaration, a reminder that this island was not waiting to be discovered. It already belonged to people who had spent thousands of years proving that they could survive perfectly well without the rest of the world. And yet, despite those unmistakable warnings, the outside world kept coming back. That determination to return wasn't driven by necessity, it was driven by curiosity. For centuries, sailors crossing the Bay of Bengal caught brief glimpses of the island from a distance. Dense forests covered the shoreline, and any landing was met with immediate resistance. Most ships simply continued their journey, leaving the island exactly as they had found it. But as outside powers expanded across the region during the 19th century, that distance began to shrink. Explorers and colonial officials wanted to know who lived here, how they survived, and whether contact could be established. To them, North Sentinel Island was another blank space on the map, waiting to be understood. To the Sentinelese, it was simply home. Those two ways of seeing the island could never truly meet. Whenever outsiders stepped onto the beach, they entered a world whose rules they did not understand. The Sentinelese answered in the only language that had protected them for generations. They stood together, raised their bows, and made it unmistakably clear that no one was welcome. History often describes these encounters as hostile, but from the island's perspective, they were acts of defense. The Sentinelese had no reason to believe strangers would improve their lives. Every unfamiliar face represented uncertainty, and uncertainty could threaten everything their ancestors had spent thousands of years preserving. Looking back today, that caution seems remarkably understandable. Throughout history, isolated indigenous communities across the world have suffered devastating consequences after contact with outsiders. Diseases they had never encountered spread rapidly through populations with no natural immunity, sometimes wiping out entire communities within a few years. The greatest danger wasn't always violence. Sometimes it arrived with a handshake. Without ever studying medicine or microbiology, the Sentinelese appeared to understand one simple truth through generations of experience. The safest stranger was the one who never came ashore. That belief would eventually shape one of the world's most extraordinary relationships with the outside world. One built not on trade, diplomacy, or cooperation, but on an unwavering determination to remain apart. For the rest of the world, isolation often sounds like a hardship, but for the Sentinelese, it became their greatest advantage. By refusing regular contact with outsiders, they protected far more than their land. They protected a way of life that had been shaped over thousands of years. Every generation inherited the same forests, the same beaches, and the same knowledge that had allowed their ancestors to survive long before the modern world existed. That doesn't mean life on the island is easy. Every day begins with uncertainty. Food cannot be bought or stored in supermarkets. There are no hospitals to rely on, no electricity to light the night, and no machines to make difficult tasks easier. Survival depends entirely on the skills of the community and the health of the island itself. When the tides change, they know where to search for fish trapped among the reefs. When fruit ripens in the forest, they know exactly where to find it. They hunt, gather, and build using techniques refined over countless generations, reading the landscape almost as if it were a familiar language. Knowledge is their inheritance. Children don't learn from books or classrooms. They learn by watching, helping, and repeating. Every successful hunt, every shelter built, and every lesson passed from an elder strengthens the community's chances of surviving another generation. In a world that depends on technology, the Sentinelese depend on memory. And perhaps that's why their isolation has endured for so long. It isn't simply enforced with bows and arrows. It's reinforced every single day through a culture built around self-reliance. The outside world often asks what the Sentinelese are missing. A more interesting question might be what they've managed to keep. While much of humanity has spent centuries reshaping nature to fit its needs, the Sentinelese have survived by learning to fit themselves into nature instead. That quiet balance is precisely what makes the island so fragile. Because it only works as long as the outside world respects the boundary the Sentinelese have defended for generations. That understanding didn't come overnight. For many years, outsiders believed that enough patience or enough persistence could eventually build a relationship with the Sentinelese. Some expeditions left gifts on the beach, hoping to show peaceful intentions. Coconuts, metal pots, and other items were offered before visitors quietly withdrew. Sometimes the gifts were taken, sometimes they were ignored, and sometimes they were rejected altogether. Those moments revealed something important. The Sentinelese were not waiting to be welcomed into the modern world. They were deciding on their own terms what belonged on their island and what did not. Over time, researchers and governments began to recognize a difficult truth. The greatest threat to the Sentinelese wasn't their resistance to outsiders, it was the outsiders themselves. A single visitor could carry viruses or bacteria that caused nothing more than a mild cold for most of us, but could be devastating for a community that has lived in isolation for thousands of years. History has shown this pattern again and again as isolated indigenous peoples around the world suffered catastrophic losses after first contact. Gradually, the goal changed. Instead of trying to establish contact, the priority became protecting their isolation. Today, Indian authorities enforce a strict exclusion zone around North Sentinel Island. Boats are not allowed to approach its shores, and unauthorized visits are prohibited. The purpose isn't to preserve a mystery for the rest of the world. It's to give the Sentinelese the freedom to continue living as they always have. In a time when satellites can photograph almost every corner of the planet and information travels across continents in seconds, North Sentinel Island reminds us that not every place needs to be explored, photographed, or explained. Some places deserve something far rarer: respect. Because perhaps the greatest measure of progress isn't discovering every unknown corner of the Earth. Sometimes it's knowing when not to cross the shoreline. Standing at the edge of North Sentinel Island, it's easy to see what the Sentinelese don't have. There are no roads weaving through the forest, no hospitals, schools, or mobile networks, no ports connecting the island to the rest of the world. By modern standards, it can seem as though they have been left behind. But that depends entirely on how we choose to measure civilization. For thousands of years, the Sentinelese have done something that many societies have struggled to achieve. They have lived within the limits of their island, taking what they need, passing knowledge from one generation to the next, and protecting a home that has sustained them for countless lifetimes. Their story isn't one of frozen time. It is a story of adaptation. Every generation has faced storms, changing seasons, failed hunts, and uncertain harvests. Yet the community has endured because survival has never depended on a single individual. It has always depended on shared knowledge, cooperation, and an intimate understanding of the world around them. Perhaps that's the greatest lesson this island offers. Not that we should live as the Sentinelese do, but that human resilience takes many forms. While much of humanity has learned to reshape the environment to suit its needs, the Sentinelese have survived by learning the environment so completely that it has become part of who they are. Their greatest achievement isn't isolation itself, it is preserving a way of life that has allowed them to endure for thousands of years. And maybe that's why North Sentinel Island continues to capture our imagination. Not because it is the last great mystery on Earth, but because it reminds us that even in an age when almost every corner of the planet has been mapped, connected, and documented, there are still places where the most respectful thing we can do is simply watch from a distance. Some stories are not ours to enter, they are ours to understand. And sometimes, the greatest act of exploration is recognizing that not every world is waiting to be discovered.